Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Schmidt. I'm a fisheries biologist with the Wisconsin DNR. I'm also one of the two co-chairs of the Lake Trout Working Group. My other co-chair is Jory Jonas. And I'm here today to provide an update on lake trout restoration in Lake Michigan, in addition to some other work that the Lake Trout Working Group has been collaborating on. First, I just want to acknowledge the many other members of the Lake Trout Working Group. As you can see here, we have many state, federal, and tribal partners that provide extensive data as well as expertise to this group, and everyone on this list has contributed to the data that I'm presenting today. So the progress of lake trout rehabilitation, at least in Lake Michigan, is measured by two main objectives. One is the fish community objectives for Lake Michigan, and the second is metrics that we have outlined in the implementation strategy written by the Lake Committee. The first fish community objective I'd like to address relates to total salmonine harvest, which you might also see during the Salmonid Working Group updates. But one of them is establishing a diverse salmonine community capable of sustaining an annual harvest of 2.7 to 6.8 million kilograms, of which 20 to 25% is lake trout. So you'll see the figure here on the graph. If it's hard to see, the shaded yellow line is really what you can, or the shaded yellow area is what you should focus on, and that is indicating 2.7 to 6.8 million kilograms. That's the range. So as you can see from this figure, the objective was actually met in 2022 for the first time since 2017. In 2023, total salmonine harvest was just under 2.7 million kilograms, and lake trout in particular in 2023 was about 539,000 kilograms. The second portion of this objective is maintaining total harvest at 20 to 25% lake trout. So the figure here is showing the percent of lake trout in the total salmonine harvest from 1985 through 2023. And again, the shaded yellow portion of the figure indicates that range of 20 to 25%. So you can see in our long-term trends, lake trout harvest did fall above the target through about the early 2000s, below the target until the early 2010s, and above the target from 2018 to 2021, which did happen to coincide with lower salmon catches across the lake. In 2023, lake trout comprised almost exactly 20% of the total salmonid harvest, and thus this FCO objective was met. We do also have an objective listed in the FCOs to establish a self-sustaining lake trout population, and we examine multiple factors to evaluate progress towards this objective, including stocking targets, the evaluation objectives outlined in the implementation strategy, controlling mortality, and addressing wild recruitment. I briefly want to touch on stocking. The maximum stocking target for lake trout in Lake Michigan is still about 3.5 million yearling equivalents per year. The current interim target is about 2.5 million lake trout. And in 2023, just over 2.2 million lake trout were stocked in Lake Michigan. The map you can see on the right side of your screen here is just locations where lake trout have been stocked from 2000 to 2023. So the individual dots aren't indicative of numbers, just location. So every one of those dots shows somewhere where lake trout have been stocked over the past 20 or so years. But keep in mind the distribution of offshore versus nearshore that you can see here, because we'll compare that later to what it's been like in the most recent 5 years. But briefly, I will just show this figure, which shows the number of lake trout stocked lake-wide from 1999 through 2023. So you can see a period of years where over 3 million lake trout were stocked lake-wide, but on average from 2018 through present, it's been about 2 million, which is slightly under that interim target. And as I mentioned, I do think it's important to highlight where these lake trout have been stocked recently. This map shows the locations of lake trout stocking over the past 5 years alone. And in this case, the different sized blue dots on the map do indicate a difference in numbers of lake trout stocked. And as you can see, stocking focus has shifted primarily to offshore reefs, which was done for a number of reasons, one of which was increased survival of lake trout. And you can also see that there's more lake trout stocked in the North Michigan waters of the lake than south. So as I mentioned, there are objectives outlined by the implementation plan, and there are 4 major objectives outlined for evaluating success. These 4 objectives are essentially written to analyze whether or not we can increase overall abundance, increase adult abundance, build spawning populations, and detecting viable eggs. So I'm going to go through each of these 4 main objectives briefly. The first objective is to increase the average catch per unit effort to greater than or equal to 25 lake trout per 1,000 feet of gill net during our spring assessments. This metric is evaluated through our spring assessment survey, in which all agencies across the lake follow the same protocols to sample lake trout during the spring when we assume the population is more mixed. The map on the slide here shows net locations for 2023. So each dot indicates a lift that occurred during last spring's assessment. And although this map only shows 2023, it is representative of survey locations that occur annually for the most part. So here we have the Lake Michigan spring catch by region, shown as the number of lake trout caught per 1,000 feet of net from 1999 to 2023. So first I want to highlight the lines on the graph. The solid black line indicates that 25 fish benchmark, and the blue line, which in most cases or all cases I think is the top of the top below the blue line, or the middle line, indicates total lake trout catch. So that's stocked and wild lake trout combined, where the orange line indicates wild catch. Any breaks you see in the line indicates years where that location was not sampled. And the graphs are roughly arranged going from the northeastern end of the lake clockwise. So on the top three figures there are nearshore waters of northern Michigan, except for the Northern Refuge, which is separate and in the center, Grand Traverse Bay. Then we circled down to more central Michigan waters, east and west WIM, which is one portion of Michigan, and then Illinois and Indiana. And then we have the Southern Refuge in Wisconsin waters and the rest of Wisconsin nearshore. So these locations were grouped to be somewhat reflective of lake trout habitat across the lake, in addition to the units used in our catch at age models. And overall, the message here is you can see that 25 fish per 1,000 feet benchmark has not been hit on a lake-wide basis for many years, with the exception of the Southern Refuge, where this benchmark has been hit since 2018, and Grand Traverse Bay, which was just shy of it in 2023. In some regions, such as non-refuge Wisconsin waters, which is labeled WM345, and Illinois and Indiana, you'll notice a gradual decline in the total catch of lake trout, with a subsequent either flat or increasing line in wild catch, that orange line. And we believe that this can be explained by a decrease in hatchery fish abundance due to decreased stocking in conjunction with an increase in natural reproduction. The Southern Refuge is one exception to that, where we believe this is mostly due to the recruitment of a Klondike humper strain of lake trout recruiting to our gill nets. The second objective is very similar, but instead of looking at overall abundance, it's addressing adult abundance, and this is increasing the average catch per unit effort to greater than or equal to 50 lake trout per 1,000 feet of gill net in our fall spawning surveys. So like the spring, the map on the figure that you see here indicates lift locations in the fall. In actually 2022, although I'll note that 2023 was almost similar, or almost exactly the same, except that we didn't get to the Southern Refuge in 2023. So there's considerably less coverage of the lake in the fall versus the spring, but many of these locations have been sampled annually since at least the early 1990s, so it does give us long-term trends of lake trout using these individual spawning reefs. And so here we have the Lake Michigan fall catch by region. Again, it's shown as the number of lake trout per 1,000 feet of gill net from 1998 through 2023. As with the spring figures, the solid black line on each graph indicates that 50 fish benchmark. The blue line indicates total lake trout catch, and the orange is wild only. I do have the regions of the lake grouped differently in this figure, mostly as a result of the difference in sampling locations. I'll note that the working group has been reviewing these groupings, but for now we have the non-refuge waters of northern Michigan, and again, the Northern Refuge, Grand Traverse Bay. The middle line we have Arcadia and Leland, Indiana waters, Illinois waters, nearshore Milwaukee, which in Wisconsin waters, the Southern Refuge, and then Clay Banks, which is around Sturgeon Bay. And so you can see here that in contrast to the spring, on a lake-wide basis, that 50 fish benchmark was met in 2023, with the exception of Indiana and the non-refuge waters of Wisconsin. Michigan waters have been meeting this metric actually for a number of years, and Illinois waters and the Southern Refuge have met it almost over the entire time series. We can also see increases in wild lake trout CPUEs here, which is certainly encouraging to see. And I do also want to point out here the decline in total catches reflected particularly in that near shore Milwaukee and Clay Banks areas, but a subsequent increase over the time series in natural reproduction is again likely explained by a decrease in hatchery fish abundance. But overall, this is one metric that is generally being met. The third objective, building spawning populations, states that we should achieve progress towards attaining spawning populations that are at least 25% females and contain 10 or more age groups older than age 7. The analysis for the proportion of females caught during spawning assessments by region of 2023 is still in progress, but what I can show you is the proportion female lake trout caught in spawning assessments on a lake-wide basis through 2023. So the figure here has percent female reflected on that x-axis, and the blue line indicates that 25% female benchmark. So although the results have been variable, this objective has been met in some years and not others, but met in most years at most locations. And the second part of this benchmark is addressing that number of age groups over age 7. And again, this analysis is still ongoing for 2023. The following figure here shows different groupings than what I've been showing you. So really what I want to focus on here is that x-axis is not actually lake trout age. It's those number of age groups over age 7 seen in the population. So that solid black line is that 10 age groups over age 7 benchmark. And so you can see that overall this hasn't been met in certain locations such as northern Michigan, but in recent years you'll be able to see some of those bars coming across, and that's mostly southern Lake Michigan waters, so Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin, especially in the southern refuge. And the fourth and final objective is to detect a minimum density of 500 viable eggs per meter squared, which is defined as eggs with thiamine concentrations of greater than 4 nanomoles per gram. We don't have the results from this. Agencies across the lake collect lake trout eggs during the spawning season, and we submit them for analysis through USGS. So those 2023 results are still pending, but here's the results from our 2022 report. And again, that dashed line is showing that 4 nanomoles per gram benchmark. And you can see that overall, lake-wide, we've been well above this benchmark, which is certainly encouraging. So although that concludes those 4 objectives outlined in the implementation plan, I did want to touch on wild recruitment, which I've mentioned a few times. So the Lake Trout Working Group is looking to detect wild juvenile lake trout in bottom trawl surveys, gill net assessments, and the recreational fishery, including creel and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service mass marking data. In addition to the catch per unit effort data I've already showed you, on a lake-wide basis in 2023, catch per unit effort of wild fish was 2 wild lake trout per 1,000 feet of gill net in the spring and about 13 in the fall. This figure represents the time series for the number of wild juvenile lake trout caught in the USGS annual bottom trawl survey provided by Chuck Medengen. So catch of wild lake trout in the bottom trawl survey, as you can see, has been increasing over time, which is certainly an encouraging trend. And I don't have any results from the recreational fishery today, but I suspect Matt Cornice might have some, so stay tuned for that. And the final topic I want to touch on very briefly is mortality. The mortality target states that annual total mortality for adult lake trout should not exceed 40%. Estimates of mortality have been improving in southern Lake Michigan waters due to statistical catch at age models. And although we are still looking at this for 2023 as well, I'm going to show this figure that shows up to 2022 data. And again, I know it's a lot to look at, but really what to focus on is the first 3 boxes you can see at the top are all Michigan waters. And in the middle, we have MM67, which is central Michigan waters around the southern refuge. Then we have Illinois and Indiana waters, the Wisconsin waters outside of the refuge, and then the bottom is Wisconsin waters, including our southern refuge. And really the message here is that mortality is a lot higher in the north than it is in the south for Lake Michigan, but overall this metric is one that was met pretty closely in 2022 across all regions. So in summary, for 2023, the fish community objectives for percent lake trout harvest was met. Lake trout mortality is higher in northern waters, but is generally low. The spring catch per unit effort remains under the target lake-wide, except for the southern refuge, where the target has been exceeded since 2018. Fall catch pre-net effort remains above the target in most survey locations. On a lake-wide basis, percentage of females in the fall survey has exceeded 25% in most years, and more than 10 age groups older than age 7 have been documented in Wisconsin and Illinois waters, including the Southern Refuge and Julian's Reef. Wild recruits have been detected in bottom trawl surveys. Catch of wild lake trout has increased in assessment surveys in Grand Traverse Bay, Julian's Reef, and the Southern Refuge, and decreases in nearshore stocking over the past several years is now reflected in assessment catches. And very briefly, I just want to highlight some ongoing work by the Lake Trout Working Group. We're currently in the process of finalizing that 2023 Lake Trout Working Group report. We have an ongoing review of the Southern Lake Michigan catch at age models, discussion of research priorities and studies the working group might want to pursue, and we have a number of new members that are bringing great ideas to the group. And one of the things that we've been working on briefly that I don't have included in the slide is a literature review of the Klondike strain lake trout and looking into differences between Klondikes and lead lake trout strains. But with that, it seems like I have a few minutes for questions if anyone has any.